Once upon a time, in the bustling kingdom of Ifu, a man named Lawrence lived with his beloved wife, Janet, and their two beautiful daughters, Elizabeth and Doris. Lawrence, a proud man, had everything a man could wish for: wealth, status, and a loving family. But despite all of this, one thing weighed heavily on his heart. He had no son. The kingdom of Ifu had a tradition that the family name and legacy would be carried on by a male heir. Every time Lawrence looked at his daughters, he couldn't help but feel the pressure of his lineage slipping away. The pride of his ancestors, it seemed, would not be passed on through him. Janet, a gentlewoman, tried to comfort Lawrence as best as she could. But she, too, felt the weight of the expectations placed on her as a mother. She had already given Lawrence 2 daughters, and now she was expecting another child. "I hope this baby isn't another girl," Lawrence muttered one evening as he looked out at the horizon. His words cut through Janet like a knife. "Lawrence, it's not something I can control," Janet replied, trying to remain calm. "It's not about what I can choose, but about what you put inside me." But Lawrence was firm, his frustration turning into anger. "No, Janet. It's the woman's responsibility to give a man a son. If you can't give me that, then it's your fault," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Janet felt her heart break at his words. She couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him, but at the same time she knew she had no control over the gender of the child. Yet with a sense of duty, she agreed to go for an ultrasound, hoping for good news. When the results came back, Janet's heart sank as the doctor confirmed she was expecting another girl. Fearing Lawrence's anger and disappointment, she chose to keep the truth hidden. Instead, when she returned home, she told Lawrence, "It's a boy." Lawrence's face lit up with joy. His excitement was palpable as he immediately called his mother to share the good news. Janet, though pleased with the new car Lawrence surprised her with in celebration, couldn't shake the heavy burden of her deception. Despite the happiness, Lawrence showed she knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. Lawrence's frustration continued to boil over, especially with his growing resentment toward Janet. His desire for a male heir, a son to carry on his name, consumed him. Despite Janet's many attempts to explain, his frustration mounted with each passing day. Janet felt increasingly isolated, her attempts to keep peace with Lawrence becoming harder. One evening, Janet, still adjusting to the pressures placed on her, pleaded with Lawrence to take her and the baby to the clinic for a checkup, but Lawrence refused. When she persisted, he snapped, calling her unreasonable. Feeling desperate, Janet reached out to Lawrence's close friend, who agreed to take her to the clinic instead. Upon Lawrence's return, his mother was already waiting, expecting news. However, when she learned that Janet had gone to the clinic with her friend, suspicion began to creep in. Lawrence's mother, convinced that something was amiss, insisted on a DNA test, questioning the paternity of the children. Lawrence, enraged, confronted his friend, demanding an explanation for why he had helped Janet without his knowledge. His friend, growing frustrated, responded bluntly, "You've been letting your mother control everything. Instead of focusing on your family, you let her take the lead in every decision." Shocked by his friend's words, Lawrence reluctantly realized that perhaps he had been too focused on his mother's influence and his own frustrations. His friend reminded him that he needed to take responsibility for his actions and focus on what truly mattered: his family. Determined to fix the rift, Lawrence returned home, his mind in turmoil. In a serious conversation with Janet, he declared that once their child turned 2 months old, they would try again for a son. Janet, exhausted from the physical toll of childbirth and raising 2 daughters, responded that she wasn't ready to think about another pregnancy so soon. She needed time to recover. This only further angered Lawrence, who, unable to hold back his frustration, shouted, "If you can't give me a son, I'll find someone who can." The harshness in his words struck Janet deeply. she had hoped for. Understanding, but instead was met with threats. In the days that followed, Lawrence's frustration reached a breaking point. His mother, who had long been pressuring him for a male heir, took matters into her own hands. She went to the village and brought back a woman named Angela, who she promised would give Lawrence the son he so desperately desired. Janet, devastated by the reality of sharing her husband with another woman, was left alone with her thoughts. She struggled with feelings of isolation and helplessness, feeling betrayed by Lawrence's actions. Her grief was compounded by the fact that her new rival, Angela, was now living under the same roof. Angela, pleased with the attention she was receiving from Lawrence and his mother, soon discovered she was pregnant. Lawrence's mother, delighted by the news, announced that Angela was carrying a male child. The joy was palpable in their household, but Janet's sorrow deepened. She was exhausted from the constant strain of trying to maintain her dignity while being sidelined in her own home. One day, Angela made a pointed remark to Janet as she touched her growing belly. "A real woman knows how to give her husband a son." She smirked. Janet, hurt by the insult, calmly responded, "A woman's worth isn't defined by the gender of her children. I love my daughters deeply, and that's all that matters." Angela laughed dismissively and retorted, "Love won't keep Lawrence from finding a real wife who can give him a proper heir." Lawrence, fully absorbed in Angela's pregnancy and the anticipation of a son, ignored Janet's feelings, while his mother continued to berate her. The family dynamic shifted further. As Janet felt more alienated, the tension growing with each passing day. Even her daughters, Elizabeth and Doris, sensed the change in the atmosphere and tried to comfort her, but Janet's heart felt heavy. As the situation worsened, Janet made a decision. She would focus on providing her daughters with love and support, despite the chaos around her. However, the growing emotional toll was wearing on her. Each day seemed to bring more emotional strain, and Janet couldn't help but wonder if her marriage and family would survive, felt utterly defeated. She sat down beside her daughters, holding them close, whispering words of reassurance, even though her own heart was heavy. She had never imagined that it would come to this: the betrayal, the neglect, the constant pressure to give Lawrence what he wanted. She had given him her heart and all the love she had, yet none of it seemed to matter. The next morning, Janet packed her things in silence, trying to hold back the tears as she prepared to leave the only home she had known. She knew it would hurt her daughters, but she couldn't stay in a house where she wasn't valued, where her worth was constantly measured by the gender of her children. Elizabeth and Doris, still too young to fully understand, clung to her, sensing the sadness that had taken over their once happy home. As they walked out the door, Angela looked on with a smug expression, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had gotten what she wanted, and for a moment Janet felt as though she had lost everything. But as she walked away, her heart was heavy, yet a small spark of defiance began to grow inside her. Once they were away from the house, Janet found temporary refuge with some close friends who offered their help. They provided a roof over her head, and though it wasn't much, it was a place of peace, away from the harsh words and constant tension she had endured for so long. She felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders, but still, her mind kept drifting back to Lawrence's callous treatment of her, to the way his mother and Angela had pushed her to the edge. Days passed, and Janet focused on rebuilding her life. She started looking for better work opportunities, determined to provide for her daughters without relying on Lawrence's cruelty. Every day, she reminded herself that she had more to offer than just being a vessel for male heirs. She was a woman with her own dreams, her own worth, and though the road ahead was difficult, she was ready to walk it. Meanwhile, Lawrence was in a constant state of turmoil. His relationship with Angela had started to grow strained as he realized that she was not as perfect as he had imagined. Angela, who had initially appeared to be the solution to his problems, soon revealed her true nature. Her obsession with having a male heir and her manipulative tactics began to wear on him, and he felt the consequences of his decisions weighing on him. He had pushed Janet away, blamed her for things that were out of her control, and now his life seemed emptier than ever. At night, when he lay in bed alone, he would think about Janet and the family they once had. His heart ached, and a deep sense of regret filled him. But he still refused to apologize, still too proud to admit the pain he had caused. One afternoon, as Lawrence walked through the town in a daze, a familiar face caught his eye. It was one of the old neighbors, someone who had always supported Janet. The woman approached him with a stern expression, shaking her head as she spoke. "You've made a mess of things, Lawrence," she said. "You've lost a good woman and 2 wonderful children, all because of your stubborn pride." Lawrence opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. The truth of her words hit him hard, and he found himself standing there, unable to speak. The woman left, and Lawrence was left alone with his thoughts, the guilt gnawing at him. As the weeks passed, the realization of what he had done began to haunt him. His relationship with Angela had become increasingly toxic, and he knew that something had to change. But where could he begin? Would Janet ever forgive him? Could he ever make things right? Felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing he had provided them with the support and love they had lacked for so long. He smiled, offering her a gentle nod. "Janet, you and your daughters have made this house a home. I'm just glad to help." Janet smiled back, feeling a warmth that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Her heart felt full as she looked at her daughters, who were now thriving in this new environment. Elizabeth, Doris, and Grace were growing up strong, confident, and hopeful. Janet had done everything she could to give them a better life, and seeing them happy made all the sacrifices worth it. Meanwhile, back at Lawrence's home, things were beginning to unravel. His relationship with Angela and their son, Jason, had become strained. Jason, spoiled and indulged for years, began to show signs of entitlement and disrespect. He would throw tantrums when things didn't go his way and demanded more material things, never being taught the value of hard work or respect. Angela, blinded by her love for her son and Lawrence's wealth, refused to discipline him, instead excusing his bad behavior as just him enjoying the life he was given. Lawrence, too focused on his own success, was becoming increasingly frustrated with the state of his family. He had hoped that by providing for Angela and Jason, everything would fall into place. But the cracks were starting to show. Jason's behavior was one of the major issues Lawrence had been ignoring, but the real turning point came when one of the household staff approached Lawrence with concerns about Jason's rudeness and entitlement. When Lawrence finally took the time to truly see what was happening, he was shocked and disappointed by his son's actions. Jason's behavior, combined with Angela's inability to control him, was unraveling the family dynamic he had hoped for. But Lawrence couldn't shake the guilt of how he had treated Janet and their daughters, and the realization that he had neglected them for so long began to eat away at him. Back at Chief Bernard's house, things were moving forward for Janet. As time passed, her daughters grew more independent and accomplished. Elizabeth, now in her final year of school, was making great strides toward her dream of becoming a doctor, and Doris had her own passion for art that was being nurtured. Grace, ever the joyful one, had a magnetic personality and was well liked by everyone who met her. Janet could see the potential in each of her children, and it filled her with hope for their futures. Chief Bernard continued to be a steady support for Janet and her girls, always offering a listening ear and thoughtful advice. His quiet wisdom was invaluable, and Janet had come to think of him not just as a friend, but as a true father figure to her children. As Janet reflected on her own life and the choices she had made, she realized that while the path had been difficult, it had also brought her closer to her own strength. She had rebuilt her life and her family from the ground up, and she was proud of everything they had accomplished. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden together, Chief Bernard turned to Janet with a thoughtful expression. "Janet," he said, softly, "you've made such a difference in your daughters' lives. I see how hard you work for them, how much you love them. They're lucky to have you." Janet's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at her daughters, who were playing in the garden. "I do everything for them," she replied, her voice filled with determination. "They deserve the best, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure they have a bright future." Chief Bernard smiled warmly. "You've already given them the best, Janet, and they know it." Janet felt a surge of pride, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel at peace. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was no longer alone. She had built a new family, one that was bound by love and resilience, and together they could face whatever the future held. How grateful he was for her help, and apologized for everything he had done. Grace, still upset but with a deep sense of maturity, accepted his apology. She didn't say much, but nodded, showing that she was beginning to understand the power of forgiveness, even if it didn't come easily. As time passed, Lawrence attempted to rebuild his life, but the damage he had caused was not so easily undone. He was not welcomed back with open arms, and the guilt he carried for his treatment of Janet and their daughters weighed on him daily. Lawrence did not expect forgiveness from his daughters, but he hoped for a chance to make amends, even if only for the sake of his health and survival. Meanwhile, Janet and her daughters continued to thrive. Grace's successful career as a doctor flourished. Elizabeth became a lawyer, and Doris continued to pursue her passion for art. Chief Bernard remained a steady presence in their lives, offering advice and support as they built their futures. Janet, proud of how far they had come, felt a sense of fulfillment and peace in her heart. Despite everything she had endured, she knew she had done her best, and she was proud of the woman her daughters were becoming. One evening, Janet sat with Grace, Elizabeth, and Doris, reflecting on their journey. "We've been through so much, but look at where we are now," Janet said, her voice filled with pride. "You all are the future, and I'm so proud of the strong women you've become. No matter what happens, I know you will always rise above." Grace, now at peace with the decisions she had made, smiled at her mother. "We're stronger than we think, Mom. I'll never forget the sacrifices you made for us. You've always been our rock." Elizabeth and Doris nodded in agreement, their faces filled with gratitude. As the years went on, Lawrence, now a changed man, continued to seek redemption for the wrongs he had done. He never fully regained the trust or affection of his daughters, but he worked to become a better person. Janet, though still wary of him, chose to focus on her family and the future, determined to continue building a life filled with love and opportunity for her daughters. And so the story of Janet and her daughters became a legacy of strength, resilience, and the enduring power of family. The lessons of forgiveness, the importance of self-worth, and the belief in a brighter future were passed down for generations, inspiring all who heard their story. As time passed, Lawrence gradually came to terms with his situation. He focused on improving himself and building a better future. He also made efforts to rebuild his relationship with his daughters, Elizabeth and Doris. At first, they were hesitant, but they soon saw the genuine changes in their father and began to open up to him again. Lawrence worked hard to regain their trust, showing them through actions, not just words, that he had truly transformed. One day, Lawrence received a letter from Janet. Her words were kind and forgiving, expressing that she hoped he would find peace and happiness in the future. Reading the letter, Lawrence felt a deep sense of closure. It wasn't the reunion he had hoped for, but it was a step toward healing. The weight of guilt and regret that had weighed heavily on him began to lift, and he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Janet and Chief Bernard moved forward with their relationship, planning a future full of hope, love, and shared dreams. The bond between them grew stronger each day, and Janet was grateful for the support and understanding that Chief Bernard had shown her and her daughters over the years. Grace and her sisters continued to excel in their careers. Elizabeth, now studying to become a lawyer, and Doris pursuing a degree in accounting, both made their mother proud. Grace, now a successful medical doctor, remained close to her family, supporting them in every way she could. Lawrence, though he had lost much, found a new sense of purpose. He realized that the most important lessons in life often come from the hardest experiences. He made a vow to live his life with integrity and kindness, knowing that true happiness comes from within, not from wealth or status. In the end, each of them learned valuable lessons about forgiveness, love, and resilience. While their journeys hadn't been easy, they emerged stronger and wiser, ready to face whatever the future held.